Some people don't have money every month, but they want to be involved, and you have to give them a reason to stay involved, and the money will come. Mm-hmm. It comes even maybe in much smaller ways, but it's more reliable and more loyal and more consistent.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement. Our mission is to help you raise more money so you can make the world a better place. Today's topic, how to build your nonprofit to succeed. This year, thousands of new nonprofits will open their doors. By conservative estimates, 30% of them will fail in just 10 years, and some put that number much higher. In addition, many long-standing nonprofits are struggling to survive as they face shrinking budgets, growing demand for their services, and fierce competition for donors. In today's podcast episode, we'll discuss what it takes for a nonprofit to succeed and create a lasting impact. Leading the conversation today is Jack Padovano, owner and lead consultant for IPM Advancement. Jack founded IPM to help nonprofit clients create strategic multi-channel donor and member engagement plans. He has conceptualized and executed mail, phone, and web programs for nonprofit organizations, national political candidates, and advocacy campaigns. Joining Jack is Liz Feld, CEO of Radical Hope, a nonprofit foundation committed to measurably improving the brain health of our country's young people. Since 2016, Liz has also served as president of the Suzanne Wright Foundation, founded in honor of the late Suzanne Wright, who died of pancreatic cancer. Its mission is to drive medical breakthroughs for diseases like pancreatic cancer that have not benefited from the current system of federal research. Liz also served as president of Autism Speaks, the world's leading autism science and advocacy organization. Take it away, Jack.
Thanks, Curtis. Liz, thank you so much for being here. For listeners who don't know, we've worked together on and off for many, many years, including a long stint at Autism Speaks. And since day one, I've been impressed by your candor and ability to cut through the bull and get things done that further the mission of any nonprofit that you're affiliated with. So that's why I'm so excited to talk with you today. So let's get right into it. Liz, you were involved right from the beginning at the Suzanne Wright Foundation and the Radical Hope Foundation. Yeah. In your experience, what does it take to start a nonprofit off on the right foot so that it really has the best chance for success moving forward?
Am I allowed to start by thanking you for inviting me to be on this? I'm so flattered. And anytime I get to spend, 5 minutes with you, Jack, it's a win for me. I don't know if it is for you, but what you've taught me along the way here through our partnership, and we'll talk about some of these specific things we've done together, just is informed my perspective on many things, both on the mission side and the business side of, the nonprofit space. So thank you for that. But to answer your question, what it takes are serious, committed leaders who really follow the Larry Bossidy guidance of focus and do. And he's the chairman of Radical Hope, and Bob Wright, who started the Suzanne Wright Foundation and has been my boss and mentor of mine now for 10 years, has the exact same attitude. The only thing that matters is results. Your mission can be noble. It's going to be wonderful. You can even have money. But if you're not focused on the goal line and every day able to make decisions about what is chasing a fly ball and what's going to help you deliver, at least advance the ball, then you're going to lose. And so I think that probably more than anything, as you know, Jack, because you have been advising nonprofits for years, there are a lot of noble missions out there, but without the right kind of leadership and governance and focus, they fail. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but I think ultimately really it's because there is not the same commitment to delivering results.
Yeah, I think that's right. How does financial sustainability play into it? I mean, you talked about, even if you have a lot of money, that's often not enough. You've got to do right by it.
It's so interesting. We could spend days talking about this because it's actually a more than a peeve of mine. I didn't get pretty outraged at the whole broader nonprofit space, and I actually even hate the idea of a nonprofit, which is something I hope we can spend a couple minutes talking about. But there are a lot of people who work in these mission-based organizations who are very comfortable spending other people's money without accountability. So they go out and they find donors who, whether it's kidney disease, Parkinson's disease, autism, cancer, and they get donors to invest. And they think, back to what I said earlier about the mission being enough, they just squander money. There's a lot of waste. There is so much waste in the nonprofit world. I think it's probably the most was the most shocking thing for me when I actually took over in a leadership role at Autism Speaks. I think there's a sense that there shouldn't be the same kind of accountability that there is in running another kind of business. So I guess that part, and I find, frankly, and I've served on nonprofit boards in addition to serving boards of directors in my role, running the organizations. I do think there's a lack of sound governance in many cases here. So you might get a lot of early money, a lot of friends of family that dive in with $1 million here or a couple $100,000 there, and it evaporates because there's a huge gap between the board and maybe even the board and the CEO and the whole rest of the staff. Mm-hmm. That is out doing things that they think are furthering the mission. But really, again, the metric for success should be how many lives you're saving or how many bills you've got passed or whatever it is your mission's supposed to be. And there just tends to be a real lack of follow through on the part of most of these boards. So the money, again, you can raise $10 million your first year and it can be gone pretty quickly without the follow up and the follow through and the discipline.
Yeah. You and I have talked a lot about boards and how important it is to have the right people. How do you attract the right people to your board and what are the right people?
It's interesting. I've been talking to a board about this right now. There's a big difference of opinion about whether a board is successful because of the names, that they can attract and the number. Oh, we've got 25 CEOs on our board, who run other organizations and look how high profile they are. I think you've got to figure out what needs do you need to fill in order to deliver whatever your particular mission is. Do you need subject matter expertise? Do you need more fundraising types? Do you need people who are validators in the space? Do you need people who can help you get media attention? So I think right from the get-go, you have to figure out what are these board members going to do? Rather than just, let's get this guy on our board. It's amazing. Well, what is that person actually doing or that woman actually doing for that? So that part is what is the need? And then putting the right fannies in the right seats. It's just like with the staff, frankly. What has surprised me is how many board members across, the whole foundation sector are willing to say they're serving and put their name on the board because their friends on the board and they don't do anything. They actually don't do anything. They don't give money. They don't get money. That'll give or get. Some of these board members truly, and you'd be shocked. I mean, these are names that many people listening to this podcast would know. And yet they do it because they think they're either helping a friend or they maybe even have a personal agenda associated with the mission, but they're not actually advancing the goals of the organization. So that part is really troubling to me. Having said that, there are spectacular people who never stop giving and never stop serving and never stop really networking and bringing whatever kinds of relationships they can to bear. But I tell you, I think more isn't always better. It's like any other organization, right? I mean, has that been your experience?
Absolutely. I mean, I think back to the board at Autism Speaks. Bob Wright collected, Bob and Suzanne both, they collected quite an impressive group of folks, not only on paper, but they did everything that you're talking about. The give, the get, the getting into the weeds, the sharing of their personal lists of people who can influence and have affluence. So not only to move the mission forward, from an advocacy perspective, but also to fund the effort. I mean, I just remember those people, they were intimidating.
Yes, they were. And they are still in their real lives. Yeah.
I do recall you throwing me to the wolves one day.
I did. And one of these podcasts, I'll interview you, and or maybe it's now, you can talk about your experience of really being slayed by the executive committee of that board. But you held up well, and they kept you on for years.
Well, I think we ended up in a good place. I think just, being authentic and explaining the how of how we're going to get there, how we're going to raise the money, how you can help me as a consultant and you as the CEO do that. They got it. But I go back to Bob Wright and credit him with just collecting the right folks.
Well, a couple of things there. One is, one of the reasons you were so credible and remain credible is that you don't overpromise. I mean, there is a process that's involved, and we should talk about that whole fundraising, because I mean, that's probably really everyone's biggest headache in the nonprofit world. But you didn't overpromise. No one's going to, you didn't walk in and say, by next Friday, I can raise you $1 million. I have a great direct mail program for you. You educated the board. And the reason you were able to be effective in your role, Jack, with Autism Speaks was because the board knew you were the expert, and you are the expert in what you do. They knew what kind of questions to ask you, and they were going to hold you accountable, but they weren't going to try to do your job. And you didn't walk in and try to sell something and you didn't overpromise, that you couldn't deliver.
Yeah.
So that's really, and this is a problem over and over with nonprofits, particularly in the fundraising space. Oh, I promise I can bring in these 10 corporate partners and these, millionaires. And so that's why you were so good. But, back to Bob, Bob Wright and Suzanne, when they started Autism Speaks and put that board together, they were very intentional about who they brought on. What lanes did they need to satisfy? Andrew Robertson being a perfect example. Bob went to Andrew Robertson, who was the chair of BBDNO at the time. Said, Andrew, I don't need you to give me $1. What I do need is for you to help me craft our messaging, help us get PSAs on the air, do some media stuff for us. So that was Andrew's role. Then he went to Phil Geyer, who had been the head of Interpublic Group, and said, that's what he need. I need you to do this. Mel Karmazin, I need you to do that. And that's what he did. He went around and figured who's going to help with which part of our mission, which pillar, and he gave them very specific roles. And of course, everyone, but Bob's mantra, I will tell you this, you've probably heard this many times, Jack, from your meetings with him, is everyone's an advocate and everyone's a fundraiser. No one gets off the hook on those two lanes. You don't have to be the scientist, you don't have to be the media guy, but you're definitely going to be an advocate. He means a champion, means a champion for the organization. And you're going to help raise money or give money or connect me to people. Yeah. And then Bob, to your point, Bob and Suzanne were as generous as any two people you could ever possibly find.
Liz, you talk about accountability. It makes me think about Radical Hope's assessment tool.
Yes.
Because, talk about being accountable. Can you tell the listeners a bit about Radical Hope and the tool that you've helped develop?
Thank you. This is actually really a pet project of mine that I wanted to do because of what I had learned at Autism Speaks, and also from serving on a couple of other nonprofit boards, and also talking to you and Patrick Guerrero, peers of colleagues of ours who have worked with many nonprofits. So Radical Hope was started by Pam and Phil Martin back in 2018 when they lost their son to suicide. He was a junior at Gonzaga University in Washington State. And they started Radical Hope, not really sure whether they wanted to focus on mental health research, funding programs, should they get in the advocacy arena? And I knew their family, so I went in and did some early advisory work on just helping them get a little focus, and then ended up becoming the CEO. And because of their firsthand experience with their son, Chris, they just were amazed that there were many of these programs don't measure outcomes, they don't measure results, they're not held accountable, research doesn't get to patients, all of these things that we've talked about. So the big problem is that we really, if you wanted to put a finer point on it, there didn't seem to be a standard to measure efficacy and effectiveness of programs in the foundation sector. So for donors, there was no tool to go out and say, gee, I'm looking to invest in program X. Let me see how their governance is, how their mission is. Are they sustainable? Do they hold themselves accountable? What's their leadership like? What's their organizational culture like? Just basically no standards, no metrics to measure those sort of domains that would indicate success or failure. So having seen the exact same thing myself, I asked them, and they were very generous and supported the funding of the development of these standards of excellence, as we call them. But it's an assessment tool. We brought in 4 of the top clinical psychologists in the country who had done a lot of work in this space, and one of the foremost IRB experts, actually, and put together what is a very straightforward report card. That's really what the standards look like. And we measure domains around governance, as I said, organizational culture, mission discipline, and we have now made this tool available to the public. You can go on the Radical Hope website and download it. You just have to sign a use agreement. And it's really a way almost to de-risk investment. For a donor, you look at it and say, wow, this is so helpful. I'm going to see, this is weird. They've got a lot of turnover here. I'm not sure I'm going to invest in that. Or where's their board? What's with the board? Who are these people? And these just, again, simple. It's very generalizable. And then you can customize some of the programmatic pieces as a funder or even as an organization if you're looking for a partner and you just want to assess a partner. So you can customize, those specific pieces. But more broadly, the tool is meant to be, frankly, just our contribution to the foundation sector. And interestingly, we've had a lot of donors and foundations come and download the tool and to use it. So that's our goal, was just to get, frankly, just more rigor around program investments and our own, including refining our own approach to investing, making sure that that's really how we start, stuff that we're investing in is going to deliver the returns that we're looking for.
You bet. So much can go wrong.
Zach, you've seen what works and what doesn't work, right? And some of these things look great on either, I don't even want to say on paper. You see them on the Today Show and you think, wow, now that looks like, wow, aren't they committed people? And you look under the hood and oftentimes it's not quite as strong and structured as you need it to be.
You've got to have the metrics. It really is just like running a business. And I think that's why we've been so successful with our clients, is that we constantly look at the ROI. I mean, if we're not producing enough from the perspective of the nonprofit, then we shouldn't be there, and we shouldn't be spending their hard-earned dollars. Liz, so much could go wrong in a nonprofit, particularly in the early years. In your experience, what are those things, and how do you turn them around?
I think there are a couple of things that can go wrong. The first one is mission creep. Let's just start from the premise that people who go into these organizations are committed, and they're good people, and they mean well. So, which means they have a big heart. And you look and you think there's this vast unmet need out there. There are patients who need help. There are research folks who need help. There are programs at the community level that need funding and support. It is so tempting to start, I'll do a little bit over here. I was really only going to do research, but now I actually think I'll fund some programs. So I think mission creep is probably the biggest threat to any organization right off the bat. It's not like if you buy a new house and you say, we don't have a lot of money, but we're just going to fix the kitchen. And next thing you know, you're doing the bathroom and the roof and the yard. It's really the same thing. It's other people's money, which is a really big problem. So right there, you've also violated either donor intent or betrayed it. Or, and that maybe that's a little more innocuous than violating it, but that's really what it is. So there's a disconnect there too, just this accountability to the donor, which can lead to the mission creep and vice versa. So that's number one. And two, I think having the wrong people. You're inclined to think that if someone's good at one thing, they're going to be good at this too. And that's not necessarily the case with with running an organization like this. I think that's part of the problem. And three, there is a very, I think, unhealthy focus on bringing in donor dollars right away all the time. So the dynamic is pretty transactional, right? You've got a development team or a development person or just your board and your CEO, and you're chasing donor dollars everywhere without looking at the long game for building partnerships that are going to be more sustainable, yield much bigger results over the long haul, help you elevate yourself in a broader arena. But it's a competitive marketplace. How many nonprofits are there, Jack? I mean, you'd know.
Oh, hundreds of thousands.
All chasing the same donors.
Right.
And that, I think that will sink an organization too. Right off the bat, it's immediately about chasing the dollar, filling out the 990 so it looks like all your money went to programming, it didn't go to admin, all of this sort of stuff. It's a terrible, I think functionally, I think the whole space needs a makeover. Do you?
I agree. You know what? It's interesting. All of these problems, we see it every day, particularly the mission creep, and talk about making leadership feel uncomfortable. Anytime we challenge leadership on, is this really part of your mission? Is this really what you should be spending money on, A, and B, spending any kind of time and resources on it? There's such a defensiveness. Well, of course we should. It's the right thing to do. It may be the right thing to do, morally, socially. Right. Sure, we're making the world a better place, but, does it really fit in with your mission? And so once we have that conversation and then leadership sees the error of their way on this particular creeping, if there is such a word, I always liken it back to, do you have a strategic plan? And I'll tell you, 5 times out of 10, there isn't a strategic plan. And to me, that's a good litmus test of, does this program, does this initiative, whatever it is, fit within the strategic plan? If it doesn't, don't do it.
Well, you just passed our standards of excellence gating item number 1, which is exactly that. And, of course, we all want to stay nimble enough that if the environment changes, for example, COVID, if you had a strategic plan that you were so married to that you couldn't pivot to doing virtual business, you're at a lot for the year. Sure. So there's some things you're always going to need to, you want to leave room to be able to adapt to, either to survive or just because an opportunity comes along that's something really exciting that you could leverage to get you someplace faster than you thought you were going to get. But beyond that, you are exactly right. What's the plan, and are you following it? And every quarter at your board meetings, you should be just hold it up and say, we're slow, we're behind here, or we're ahead here, or this isn't moot now, we should dump this. I think one of the other things that leads to really big problems is this unwillingness to pivot or change. And boards get really hung up on stuff, and they just don't like to have to do the heavy lift sometimes on actually changing or adjusting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, this is Curtis from IPM Advancement jumping in for a moment. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
You mentioned, you talked about donors. We see nonprofits really relying too heavily on major donors and not building, an army of folks that will support you at the level of, $50 or $100 a year. In your experience, what's the danger of that? What's the danger of just relying on major donors?
Well, to be crass about it, they die. You every year you think the same. Bill Jones is going to give you $1 million every year because he always has, and then either Bill dies or Bill feels like he's done his thing for you for the last 10 years and he's now got a new thing. They disappear. So and usually that money's all gone, right? It's not like you've been saving the guys $1 million. It's usually supporting a big part of your operation, right? So that is, I think, for the short term, sustainability is the problem. You can't live on that long term. Mm-hmm. It's also big donors don't want to be the only big donor. So they look year after year and they say, am I the only guy here giving you this money every year? What's that about? How come you haven't been able to grow and attract other money with my money? You might not be able to attract a lot of other $1 million donors, but you should have been able to attract a lot of other donors. And I think it sends a really bad message. It looks complacent and lazy on the part of the management. Mm-hmm. It sends a terrible signal. And again, it's also just stale. It's not, that part's not healthy.
Absolutely. You know, in IPM's experience, the solution includes enrolling a steady stream of smaller donors, which is a challenge for many nonprofits. But like you said, people fall off, or, you know, like you said, they die, or their interest wane, or they change. You know, having that pool of smaller donors eventually turn into mid-level donors and new major donors if cultivated right.
Yes.
And then there's the whole aspect, I think, about your experience at Autism Speaks around advocacy. You know, it's not just about raising money. It's also unleashing that army when you need a piece of legislation to pass or not pass that's going to help your mission. Can you tell us about that, you know, pairing advocacy and fundraising?
So, Jack, I'm so glad you brought it up, because that, for us, was probably our biggest and most remarkable success story with IPM. So Autism Speaks had never done a traditional direct mail program. And then, Jack, when you came in, you know, we did all the list acquisitions that we needed to do. We cleaned up all the fundamentals, the unsexy stuff that you bring your expertise to help do. But most remarkably was in the messaging around all the work we were doing, we learned through experiments with you that it was our advocacy messaging and advocacy work that was engaging people on a regular basis, and they were responding to it more than the scientific research stuff. So we would send out a direct mail piece that said, hey, there's a really important bill pending in Congress. We need you to sign a petition. We need you to call your congressperson. Will you join our army? And we also sent us $25. So the advocacy, just that was motivating just for engagement. It was a way to have a dialogue. Back to my earlier point about not being so transactional. Can you just, you know, the sky is falling, please send us money. There was a relationship building piece there. And like you said, some people don't have money every month, but they want to be involved, and you have to give them a reason to stay involved, and the money will come. Mm-hmm. It comes even maybe in much smaller ways, but it's more reliable and more loyal and more consistent. You taught, that was probably the most valuable lesson you taught, certainly me, but you taught the organization and the board. Wow. Because, you know, it was interesting. Early on with Autism Speaks, the government relations department that's what they did. They got their army of autism families to march on Washington, do their Hill Day, sign the letters, all that kind of stuff. But they weren't looked at as donors. They were never even considered to be donors. Why would they be? They were actually the government people. The donor money was coming from walks, you know, the field activities that every organization does, the 5Ks, right, the marches. But that was spectacular, and a lesson I will never forget, and have taken with me to this other work.
Thank you.
No, it was really true. Can we talk about another piece of messaging that's so important that I learned through work with another colleague of ours, Patrick Guerrero and Bill Smith, the Civitas Group? Every organization, like I say, are chasing the same donor dollars, right? Everyone, the sky's always falling. No, my disease is worse than your disease. My condition is worse than your condition. My gun issue is more important than, you know, something else. We did some focus groups around this, right? When I became president of Autism Speaks, or just shortly before, I was at that point running the communications operation, and found people don't like comparative suffering. They don't want to have to choose which disease is worse than another disease. In fact, we're all living with families that have Alzheimer's and cancer, right? Or autism and some other disability, or your passion might be gun control and cancer. Our messaging had always been autism's the worst thing of anybody. I mean, all the statistics around prevalence, which were valid and true, but it put people in a very awkward position of having to say, well, actually, my grandmother has Alzheimer's. I feel kind of weird that I'm saying this is, and it sounds like common sense, but it actually wasn't, because you just feel like you have to have this alarmist messaging all the time to quickly get your $50 or your petition signer. And that, you know, again, back to all the work that you've done, Jack, advocacy doesn't have to be about trashing the other guy or making your thing more important than the other disease. Just make your case for support. If you can't do that without making it a zero-sum game for donors, you're going to end up a lot, because most people give to more than one cause, right?
You bet. Those are very, very wise. That's incredibly wise advice. What's something that we haven't talked about or hasn't come up yet, but you think is very important and that you'd want listeners to take away from this conversation?
Jack, we were talking earlier about, what can sink an organization, even one that has a very strong mission. And I think that is a big mistake that's made often, is that someone who's experienced a personal tragedy will go out and start a foundation. And whether it's a family or an individual, and they become the chairman, they're the CEO, they're the cook, bottle washer. It can't be like that. You've got to have, not just for governance sake, because it's just more ethical to have better governance, but no one who's gone through an experience like a suicide or addiction or something else can be as dispassionate as I think leaders need to be at times when they're running a business. And I think it's so important that the chairman plays the chairman's role and the CEO is the CEO and the development person is the development person. One person who's motivated by something personal cannot come in and think they're going to run a successful organization just because they care so much and had this experience. You're doing a disservice to the mission. It can be a spectacularly important mission that doesn't deliver what it needs to deliver for people if it's not structured properly from the get-go. And I think having that kind of self-awareness to know there's a role that whoever the founder is plays, and then there's a role for the people who can come in and do the business of the business,
sure.
Run the business of the business. And you've seen this because you've been working with these organizations at small levels and at national levels. It's across the board stuff.
You bet. Liz, where can listeners find out more about Radical Hope Foundation as well as the Suzanne Wright Foundation?
So it's radicalhopefoundation.org. Please visit our website. We launched a really important program this year for college-age students who it's a skill-based wellness program to help them stay well and stay resilient. And so we're very committed to, so before they reach a crisis point. So you can get all your information on that website. And the Suzanne Wright Foundation is suzannewrightfoundation.org. And we are committed to trying to find a new and better way to deliver results for people who are suffering from diseases like pancreatic cancer that have not benefited from the current system of federal research. So really just trying to develop medical breakthroughs through a whole different kind of ecosystem of public-private partnerships. So thank you for letting me plug both of those.
You're welcome. And thank you again for all your insight today. Much appreciated.
Great to talk to you. Hope to see you in person soon.
Yes. Stay well.
That wraps up our conversation on how to build your nonprofit to succeed. Thanks to Jack and Liz for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about Liz Feld and Radical Hope, we'll include that information in the show notes, along with any other resources that were mentioned today. If you like this episode, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app, and leave us a review. The best way you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself is to post a positive review or share this episode with your network. We appreciate your help spreading the word. We also invite you to explore our growing library of white papers, infographics, and blog articles in the Learn section of the IPM website. That address is ipmadvancement.com/learn. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.